So you already heard from me earlier, so I guess I don't need the introduction, but I'm going to be giving an update on emerald ash borer and management for emerald ash borer. And I think we are a little behind on time, so I'm going to kind of breeze through some of the introductory and biology aspects of this insect, because I think a lot of people are already familiar with that. And so yeah, just basic biology, it's an invasive wood-boring beetle. It's mostly, the adults are active for a couple months in the summer. It spends most of its time as a larva just beneath the bark of the tree, feeding on the cambium in the phloem. And typically it can have a 1 to 2 year life cycle. We've seen in New Hampshire and in other areas that are kind of farther north with colder climate and shorter growing seasons. It typically takes 2 years for one insect to complete its life cycle, which I think does have some effect on slowing down the rate of spread. And I think you kind of saw that when Mike gave his Maine update. You could really see that northern infestation in Maine would seem to be moving really slowly. I think a lot of that is probably due to the climate in that area. At low levels, it kind of has this characteristic S-shaped gallery, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. As the infestation becomes more severe, you start to see like nearly all of that cambial tissue gets consumed, and the galleries of the beetles start to lose that defined shape and they start to meander. And so just some basics on the kind of phylogeny of the insect. So, it's a beetle. It's in Buprestidae, which is the wood-boring beetle family. It's a huge family. There's lots of them. We have over 800 of beetles in this family in North America. Within that family, it's in the genus Agrilus, which is also a huge, it's a huge genus. There's over 3,000 species. I saw somewhere that it's probably the largest genus in the animal kingdom. So it's a hugely diverse group of insects. We have over 175 native Agrilus in North America. And they all kind of look similar to emerald ash borer. They all have that kind of bullet shape. But most of them tend to be kind of like dull brown or black, that sort of coloration. And you might be familiar with some of these things like two-line chestnut borer and bronze birch borer, some of the most common Agrilus that we have here in the Northeast. And they have larvae that look very similar to emerald ash borer, and they produce damage that looks very similar. They even make D-shaped exit holes. But if you see this sort of damage in ash, you can be pretty much sure it's from emerald ash borer. These other native insects will be attacking stressed and dying trees of other species. So it is native to Eastern Asia, so kind of Northeast China, Southeastern Russia, Japan, Korean Peninsula, that area where it primarily feeds on Manchurian ash, which is closely related to black ash here, but has co-evolved with the ash borer, so it does have kind of natural resistances to it. So in Asia, EAB is not really considered a pest. It's actually pretty difficult to find apparently when people went over there to try and study it. Basic history, I'll again try and go through this pretty quick. It was introduced in Detroit. It was discovered in 2002 and has since spread pretty much across the country. Each of these dots represents a county level detection. So pretty much the entire eastern part of the country, as well as detections in Colorado. And if you look closely, you can even see one in Oregon, like northwestern Oregon. It was recently found. It spread, people think the initial introduction was through infested pallet material that came in through shipping containers, and then it spread from there through things like firewood, local dispersal through flight, and then also it can hitchhike on things like vehicles, things like that. Also infested nursery stock in the early days, although that's probably not so much of a vector anymore. People are probably familiar with all these symptoms, dieback, blonding, woodpeckers kind of stripping the bark off of trees. But so getting into some of the management, which I think is probably more interesting to a lot of people, is so kind of the primary long-term management strategy since the discovery of this insect has been biological control. So pretty early on, I think pretty much as soon as EAB was discovered, the level of impact it was going to have and how bad it was going to be for ash trees in North America was apparent right away. And so work began pretty much immediately on developing a biological control program. researchers went over to the native range of the ash borer and tried to figure out what natural enemies were attacking it over there. And there was a whole host of mostly parasitic wasps that were discovered. These wasps were then kind of subjected to host specificity studies, so brought back to a quarantine lab in North America where they were exposed to a lot of our native wood-boring insects to make sure that they only attacked emerald ash borer. Initially, there was 3 species of these parasitic wasps that were discovered that were, made it through these trials. Those are the 3 that you see here. The 2 outer wasps, Spathius agrile and Tetrasticus planopenisi, are what are known as larval parasitoids. So the wasps lay their eggs in the emerald ash borer larva, so they actually have an organ called an ovipositor, which is kind of like a modified stinger, I guess you could say, that they use to drill through the bark of the trees and inject their eggs into the ash borer larva. Each female wasp is capable of laying, I think with Tetrasticus, over 50 eggs in a single EAB larva, so it's highly fecund. I don't know the exact number for the Spathius, but it's at least, a couple dozen eggs per larva. So both these insects are capable of reproducing, they're capable of reproducing very rapidly. The middle insect, Oobius agrile, it's super tiny. I think the adults are smaller than 1 millimeter. It's an egg parasitoid. So in that picture, you can actually see the female wasp laying its egg in that kind of orange blob, which is an emerald ash borer egg. So they're super tiny, but which makes them kind of difficult to study. And so the initial releases of these wasps occurred in 2006, 2007, kind of in the Michigan, Ohio area where EAB has been the longest. This map is showing all the locations in the following years, so to date, all of the locations where these wasps have been released. So you can see it's a huge program. There's a facility in Michigan that pretty much all they do is rear out these insects and then ship them to kind of cooperating agencies. So it's a really large program with the goal of getting these things established in our environment so they can kind of create self-sustaining populations and move as the ash borer moves throughout so that we can eventually hopefully have some level of control. I think one thing that's important to stress is that it takes a long time for these wasps to kind of become established, and because emerald ash borer, the populations can kind of spike so quickly, and the ash borers overwhelm the large standing trees before the parasitoids are able to kind of build up a large enough population to have any sort of controlling effect. So what we expect and what we're seeing is the initial wave of emerald ash borer kind of rolls through an area, killing all the bigger mature trees. But ash that are about 1 inch in diameter and smaller are too small for the ash borer larva to complete their development in. So those trees get spared, and we're left with what we call an aftermath forest, which is just these seedlings and sapling ash that were too small to get killed. And so it's in this kind of scenario where the real hope for the biocontrol program lies. So you have just these, kind of scattered, surviving small trees. And because there's not really a lot of ash on the landscape, the EAB population crashes to low levels, but it doesn't go away completely. It kind of persists on those small trees as they're growing into acceptable size classes. And so you have low ash density, low ash borer population, and so that's kind of the situation where we are placing our hope for the biocontrol. This is just a kind of closer look at the northeast region. You can see that there's really kind of extensive coverage of these biocontrol release sites. So just a quick summary to date. This is just the total numbers of each of these species that have been released. You'll notice I have the same picture for that Spathius. Initially, there was one species, Spathius agrile, that was approved for release. It turns out that species was kind of more adapted to warmer climates, and so it's primarily released in the southern United States. And then in 2017, a 4th species of parasitic wasp was approved for release. That's Spathius galeni, which is what's in that picture here. They look almost identical. They're in the same genus. They're very similar, but Spatheus galeni is from southeastern Russia and is more adapted to our climate in the Northeast. But you can see there's huge numbers of these things that have been released. And so people have gone back and looked at the establishment and spread of these insects. And the results so far have been pretty encouraging. It's still kind of too early to tell what the ultimate fate and what effect they're going to have on these forests, but Spatheus galeni especially has been found to, in some of these aftermath forest situations, parasitizing up to 75% of the ash borer larvae in those areas, and it can spread. I mean, people have been finding it spreading up to about 3 miles a year, maybe even farther than that. And so that mortality rate has equated in these research studies to about a 50% decline in EAB population, in one study. Tetrasticus, also 20% mortality, which isn't as high as the Spatheus, but it's a contributing mortality factor. It also spreads a lot quicker, or at least it's been documented spreading a lot farther in a quicker amount of time. Like I said, Oobius it's really tiny. It lives in the eggs. It's really hard to study. I know in New Hampshire we are recovering it consistently, but it's really hard to get any sort of population metrics on it because of its kind of size and cryptic nature. So the 3 of these parasitoids seem like they have the potential to kind of have some controlling effect. In addition, we have there are some native parasitoids that will attack emerald ash borer, usually not in meaningful numbers, but they contribute low levels of mortality to the EAB populations. Also things like woodpeckers. In the main wave of emerald ash borer, when it moves through, they aren't capable of keeping up with the huge spike in EAB, but in lower level infestations, they can have meaningful effect. So there is, I think, some hope for ash in the future. Another thing that people are looking at is the potential for EAB tolerance in ash trees. So just as an example, this picture that I'm showing you is a green ash tree growing in a park in Concord, New Hampshire. That picture was taken this past summer, and it's less than a mile from the first known emerald ash borer infestation in New Hampshire. So that tree has been, you can look at it, it has a full canopy, it has no signs of woodpecker damage, it's completely healthy, and it's been growing for over a decade in kind of the epicenter in New Hampshire of the emerald ash borer infestation. And if you look at, there are also there's some trees kind of adjacent in the same area to this tree that also look okay, but everything else on the surrounding landscape is dead. So it appears that there might be some, a local pocket of tolerant trees that we found. And there's a number of factors that could potentially influence this tolerance. Some things that people have been looking at are physiological defenses. So when the larvae are trying to, feed on the wood of the trees have a ability to grow over, just a really stimulated growth response where they can kind of grow over and entomb that larva in wood, killing them. There's also chemical defenses that the trees could potentially have, so just higher levels of kind of herbivore-induced chemical defenses that help defend them, but also bark texture. So, it seems kind of a weird defense to think about, but the female beetles really prefer to lay their eggs in kind of cracks and crevices of that like really fissured bark that ash are known to have. And so trees, especially kind of those medium-sized trees before they get super big, sometimes can have, retain their smooth bark texture into, larger sizes than some others. So, trees that have smoother bark tend to be less preferred egg-laying sites for the female beetles. And so there's researchers out there that are kind of trying to identify some of these tolerant trees and start breeding programs where they're breeding these trees together to try and produce even higher levels of tolerance in those kind of offspring trees. And we in New Hampshire, we kind of worked with an organization called the Ecosystems Research Institute based out of New York, where they have a ash monitoring program where they've kind of developed several survey protocols that they're encouraging landowners to go out and establish on their own, kind of create their own monitoring sites, where you can try and identify some of these tolerant trees and then get in touch with the people who are doing the breeding programs to try and get them some of these tolerant trees to use. And so you can find out more about these programs on monitoringash.org. They have a number of kind of survey protocols. They're all really easy. We set some up in New Hampshire. It took I think about maybe an hour, 2 hours probably to set up their most extensive plot, and then it takes probably a half hour per year after that, just going through and checking, looking for and kind of recording tree health for 40 trees. And that's their most extensive kind of survey protocol. They have others that are less kind of labor intensive than that. And so if you're interested, if you have land that you want to maybe include in this sort of program, you can go to their website and get more information on how to participate. There's also chemical controls that are effective for treating individual ash trees. Typically, these have been kind of really used on landscape level trees because they are expensive. It's not really a practical management solution to go out treating trees in the forest. But I know in New Hampshire, we've been working on a program to treat forested plots as kind of a way of retaining some trees on the landscape, preserving local genetic diversity, and allowing those trees to serve as a seed source to hopefully repopulate future generations. And so this map is showing areas that we've treated the trees, or where we've created these pockets of treated trees. And I know other organizations have kind of experimented with doing similar treatment plots. And so it's maybe not the most appealing thing to go out and spend hundreds of dollars every few years to keep ash alive on your forest but it is an option. So in New Hampshire, we have 80 of these plots that we've established so far, and we plan to add 20 more in the northern part of the state as emerald ash borer moves up that way. Another kind of management technique that we've been implementing is seed collection. So 2 years ago was a really heavy ash seed year in New Hampshire, and I think across the Northeast region. We were able to take advantage of that to collect seeds from around the state and plant them at our state forest nursery. So that's what I'm showing in these pictures here. So that picture on the left is sowing these seeds in the fall of 2022, and then last spring they started to germinate, and that's the picture on the right. And right now the plan is to allow those seedlings to grow for a couple years and then transplant them back out into forests kind of nearby where they were collected from. Ideally, in some of the, we'd take some of these seedlings and plant them in the treatment plots or nearby, but really wherever we can find good spots for them, we'll try and get them. There's just kind of a map showing where we were able to collect seedlings from. You'll notice there's kind of a void in the middle part of the state. That's because that's where emerald ash borer is kind of the most severe, and we were hard pressed to find any healthy trees to collect any seeds from in that area. So I think it ended up being, 16 or 18 sites throughout the state. And that picture on the right is just kind of showing the hopeful end goal. So getting, good seedling establishment that can kind of hopefully grow into larger trees into the future. There is, I know, the University of Maine. We just, for people that were at the Northeast Forest Pest Council, I know a few of you were, we had some students give presentations on work that they're doing to establish seed collections. They're working specifically with brown ash or black ash to collect kind of seeds to preserve those trees. But this is another thing, if people are interested in participating in seed collection on their own, you can go to their website to kind of see protocols for how you can best do this yourself. If you're interested in planting them yourself, or if you're interested in, there's seed banks that are accepting these seeds that kind of have different standards for how you should process the seeds beforehand, but they have all that information on there if you're interested, if that's something you're interested in. And so I guess the last thing is, and a question I get asked a lot is, what's the future of ash in our forests? And it's kind of a hard question to answer at this point. It seems pretty much inevitable that the main wave of emerald ash borer is going to move through and kill all the standing large trees, but then, what's going to happen to this kind of cohort of these small seedlings and saplings? And I think I'm starting to be more optimistic that under the protection of the biocontrol program, that we will have some of these small trees be able to reincorporate into the forest and reach maturity. I think in our lifetimes, I don't envision ash ever being kind of having the importance in our forest that it did pre-emerald ash borer, but I think, optimistically, it'll be something that you'll be able to find scattered out in the forest here and there, occasionally as a large tree, something like that, but it really only time will tell. And so I guess the last question that I'll address here, and something I get asked a lot, is what should I do with my ash trees if I'm managing my forest? And that really, I guess, depends on what the goal for your land is, and how many ash you have, what stage of infestation the forest is in currently. And so one of the main things to consider is kind of like, what are the benefits of leaving ash versus harvesting it? The benefits of harvesting are pretty obvious. You get to extract some economic value from those trees before they get killed. If you have land that's used for recreation, you're also removing potential hazard trees. But then the benefits for leaving ash are things like retaining seed sources. You could have possible tolerant trees that you're leaving. They also serve as kind of a reservoir, like a reservoir for emerald ash borer, which you might think, like, why do I want EAB on the landscape? But having those EAB larvae around do serve as a host source for the biocontrol agents to become established. So there is actually some benefit there. And then just also the ecosystem benefits that ash provide. And so those are just kind of things to consider. And with that, I will take any questions.
Questions for Bill? When it comes to those parasitic wasps, obviously they're approved to be released, but how long do they remain in the environment after they've been released? Do they ever die off, or do they just stay
Like individual wasps have, I think, about a month. They can live about a month. I don't know what the actual lifespan is once they're out in the environment. But I think, the populations, as long as emerald ash borer is around, the wasp populations will be there as well, yeah.
Other questions or questions for the people who I cut off earlier?
So I work doing audits on carbon offset projects.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we look at is like a permanent risk rating, and includes insect disease, fire. And one of the things we wrestle with is trying to find the most updated websites or source information for insects and disease, and doing searches on the internet to see their state stuff that is out there. There's also USDA and federal and private. Just wondering, what is the most up-to-date spot that we could go to kind of
Yes.
the latest and greatest information.
Yeah, so I know I can speak for New Hampshire specifically. I know if you go to our forest health website in New Hampshire, that's going to be the most up-to-date, and we also work with UNH Extension. Actually, most of the information on our state website redirects to the UNH Extension website, and that's going to be the most up-to-date information you can find. And I suspect for other states, the individual state websites are going to have the most up-to-date, because I think most of those like federal organizations are building their maps based off of state data. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yep.
What's the nature of the spread runoff for EABs? Is it, you think it's reintroductions, spot reintroductions, or is it flyaway?
So I think, yeah, if you, in that map I showed, it was kind of like a central point in Concord, and then it kind of radiated out from there. I think that's mostly, I think it was mostly like natural dispersal, so the beetles flying, but also kind of like short range hitchhiking. So the beetles do, like, they'll get, I've found them in the bed of my pickup truck, or like on the roof of my car. They will move by vehicle. But we had a couple kind of short range satellite infestations that we picked up, but we didn't find, or so far we haven't found any major jumps. It was kind of like a gradual progression. Yeah. And
I was wondering if you were receiving any pushback from the public with what is essentially introducing an invasive to combat an invasive.
I mean, we have had people skeptical at first, but you can find the information online of the process that these insects went through, the screening process. And one of the benefits of using parasitic wasps is that they do tend to be very highly host specific. And biological control is something that's used frequently in agriculture, and it's becoming more common to control forest pests. But yeah, I've had some people that were skeptical, but I think most people get on board once they kind of realize the level of screening that goes in before these insects can get released. And I think part of that concern is obviously there's been some horror stories of the early days of biocontrol where people didn't really know what they were doing, and you have things like cane toads in Australia. But I think now we've learned from past mistakes and have kind of refined the process.
Have you guys reached out to Midwestern states that have had this longer to see what they're now seeing? Now the big push has gone through and it's been a while. What are they seeing for ash recovery in their forests?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I have talked to some people that have worked out in the Midwest, and I think they are starting to see some of these smaller trees that are able to grow into, I think, 4, 5, 6-inch trees before a lot of them do eventually get attacked. But I think as the parasitoid populations build, hopefully some of those trees will be able to survive and reach larger size classes. In a lot of these trees that are growing into 6-inch trees, it sounds like they get attacked, but they're not attacked to the severity where they get killed. So it's kind of levels of damage that the tree can persist through.